Good day, everyone. My name is Johanna, and I'm from the UNIN Innovation Network. Thank you for joining us for the second webinar in our new learning series on the fundamentals of blockchain. If you joined us for the first session that we hosted a couple of weeks ago, you will remember that in that session, we talked a lot about what are the fundamentals of blockchain. Think of it as a 101 on blockchain. We talked about what distributed ledger technologies are, how they relate to digital rules and smart contracts. We learned about key features of blockchain, such as trust, immutability, and transparency. And we also got an overview of what blockchains can be used for in a very, very high level manner. And this kind of set the foundation for this learning series that we've kicked off. And in future series, workshops, webinars, we'll be looking to dive a little bit more into distributed ledger technologies, their applications specifically for UN audiences who are very new to blockchain. So thanks for being with us again today in this session in which we're looking to discuss a little bit more why blockchains are an interesting technology for the UN and what opportunities they can help us unlock. And of course, we'll also explore what risks might arise from using blockchain technologies, and that's specifically in the context of the UN, so focusing more on what are opportunities and risks for using it as a UN entity rather than the broader global risks and opportunities related to blockchain. Before we start, we try to make webinars as engaging as possible. So setting up on that ambition, we would like to launch a very quick poll and ask you if you, in the context of the United Nations, think that blockchain presents more opportunities or challenges. And you should be able to see a poll on your screen now. I'm very curious to see what colleagues will think. It's a nice benchmark to have for this webinar. So a couple of colleagues still indecisive, leaving it open for 3 more seconds. And then I'm very pleased to tell you that the vast majority on this call thinks blockchains offer opportunities for the UN. We obviously agree. That's what we're doing this series here. Thank you very much for sharing that with us. Right, so as I mentioned, we're trying to, on the next slide, you'll actually see the sessions that the course has featured on already. So there's a brief overview on slide 2. Session 1, we've already talked about, oh, I have an interesting screen layover here. No screen over, so wonderful. So we already talked about the introduction. Today we're talking about opportunities and challenges. We'll be exploring use cases, different elements. We'll be looking at different types of blockchain. We'll also talk about cryptocurrencies and decentralized finance. So quite an ambitious agenda that we're hoping to get through over the coming months. On the next slide, I am showing you how you can get engaged in this conversation. So we really like it if you have any questions, please put them to us. It makes it so much more lively. And we really appreciate if you can put them in the Q&A box on Zoom rather than in the chat. It's quite difficult to monitor questions that come in the chat. So if you put them in the Q&A box, we have a much better chance of keeping track of them. And you can also vote on questions there. So that really helps us understand what's of interest to you. We'll try and take questions throughout the presentation. So there'll be different moments when we break briefly to see if you have any burning questions. And because the most popular question tends to be if the webinar is recorded, yes, it is, and it will be available on the UN Innovation Network website. So getting that question out of the book already. And then without any further ado, it's my real pleasure to introduce you to our presenter of the day. Dejan Dicnic is a digital transformation and online learning specialist. He's currently working with the UN Joint Inspection Unit. And Dejan has a background in online and distance education and information technologies. And he's worked in this space for over 20 years, both in the private, the public, and the nonprofit sector. And he's also been very active in academia. And I believe he is still working as a lecturer, focusing on digital topics and provides strategic advice to international organizations and NGOs. So we're really lucky to have Dejan join us today, especially as it's so close to the end of the year. Dejan, thank you for joining us. I believe you've agreed to go on video. Lovely to see you. And thanks for helping us understand what the opportunities and challenges for using blockchain in the UN are. We really appreciate it. Over to you.
Thank you, Johanna, and hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and to have a chance for this exchange with everyone who's interested in blockchain. And I've seen we have a very positive audience today with, based on the poll. So without further ado, let us look at the presentation that we have planned for today. As Johanna said, there will be opportunities for your contributions and questions and comments and some other ways. We are going to try and look at the blockchain's opportunities and challenges, particularly in the perspective, or from the perspective of the UN system. Before I go to the actual topics, I just want to briefly mention, so I have this privilege of working with Joint Inspection Unit on the blockchain project, and I had the privilege of working on a few more projects that mix governance and technology and look at social and developmental implications of new emerging technologies. So I worked on cloud computing, learning, special role of online learning, which is becoming ever more relevant in the current situation. And JIU does have this thematic, especially the inspector I'm working with, thematic connection, trying to link key issues around technologies, but avoiding to have a strictly technical or techno-optimist perspective. For those of you who are not familiar with JIU, it's the only independent external oversight body of the United Nations systems, which conducts various evaluations of the system. But I would like to stress that it's not the audit kind of, or typically it's not an audit kind of evaluation or inspection that JIU does. It's very forward-looking. It aims to become agent of change. So the reports that JIU produces tend to have recommendations for future improvements, both for individual organizations, but also for the UN system as a whole. And one of the key targets for JIU inspections is to promote greater coordination and overall system efficiency. JIU takes pride in making practical recommendations that will actually be accepted and adopted by the organizations. And there is a system for tracking how many recommendations of each report have been accepted by organizations and put into practice. Towards the end of the presentation, I will share a link where you can see where to find JIU reports. And in the scope of this work, I'm working currently, so one of the two projects I'm working on is a report on blockchain applications in the United Nations system towards a state of readiness, a report that is prepared, led by Inspector Petru Dumitriu, who has this particular, so he is the one who led the learning and knowledge management and policy research uptake and cloud computing reviews in the past years. And his particular focus is on making very practical recommendations. So we hope that this report, which is soon to be finished, will be in the same spirit, and that it will help organizations understand complicated technical matters, but what are their implications for our main work. So blockchain, I have no doubt you noticed over the last few years how much media coverage blockchain received, and that we had a year or two of a really high buildup of expectations for what this technology can do. This is just one of the mainstream media titles from 3 years ago. Of course, a lot of it was related to cryptocurrencies, but not only that. And such attention to this new emerging technology, of course, had an impact on the work in the development sector. Just for illustration, I have two pictures here of what the German development agency GIZ came up with 2 years ago, as in a kind of mapping where did they think blockchain can help in our work on sustainable development. And they identified all the SDG areas where they thought some contribution of blockchain technology is possible. Such level of hype and building great expectations for emerging technology is not specific to blockchain. It's not entirely new. Maybe some of you are familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, the way Gartner came up with this pattern in covering emerging technologies, how we go through this peak of inflated expectations, then there is some kind of disillusionment until new technologies that survive and that have future stabilize on what they call plateau of productivity. So, and normally, I mean, even for blockchain, this is the case. This kind of pattern has proved to be the reality. You will find there is a URL on this slide, and you can find more up-to-date coverage by Gartner about new technologies. They are not always right, so they make mistakes. And I show this not as a scientific exact proof where each new technology stands today, or not even where blockchain is today. It's more to give you an idea that there are certain patterns of the coverage and then acceptance of new technologies. This is just one of many models. There are other innovation models that also show how innovation spreads between different user groups. So just a reminder, today we really want to look at some of the specific opportunities and challenges for the UN. Of course, opportunities and challenges related to block technologies, some of them are very general. They apply to many different areas, many different sectors, many different possible applications, but some have more relevance for the work of the UN. And this is what we're trying to do today. It's not a comprehensive list. It's not an exhaustive list of things. It's a short selection, something that we can realistically cover today. And with your help, we'll see whether my selection was also what you consider important and significant, whether we could have done a different selection, and we'll see. But this is the framework for today. At this stage, we start maybe with polling you. Johanna suggested this. Johanna, do you want to explain?
Yeah, of course. Taking a little bit of a pulse check again from the room. So just take a moment and maybe from what you already know about blockchain, however much or little that may be, just type in the chat and tell us what are the biggest opportunities that you see arising from using blockchain in the UN. There's no right or wrong answers. We're really just trying to get a sense of might be relevant for you before we share some of the findings. Skill in implementing is an opportunity. Let's see, there was 85% or so of colleagues online said there was lots of opportunities. So we're keen to hear what they might be. Don't be shy. Right, Dejan, it seems like colleagues are still warming up. So why don't we give them a moment to think about it? And why don't you walk us through the presentation and we can come back to other applications later on.
Okay, let us do that. Thanks, Johanna. Just a very brief reminder, this is the second webinar in a series in this course, and in the first, we've covered the basic features. What is it? What blockchain technology is? And I don't want to go into much detail, but just a quick reminder that we're talking about immutable distributed ledger. So it's an information technology solution. It's often branded also as a platform when it grows into an ecosystem of users and providers, etc. But in essence, it's an immutable distributed ledger. And it is made of components of technology that existed before, but were never put together in this particular way. So the elements of cryptography and encryption and peer-to-peer computing were put together in an innovative fashion. And what for me stands out among these features is clearly the distributed nature. So whenever I look at use cases for blockchain, I keep in mind this as one of the prime things. And of course, right after that, we have this property of immutable data. But really, for me, the first thing is the distribution, the distributed nature of this system. And I'm moving on with my first selection of opportunities, particular or focus on the United Nations systems. is a potential for blockchain applications to facilitate more of system-wide collaboration. And this comes from this very property of distributed nature of blockchain. So if we have distributed system that is highly transparent, that provides increased level of trust, even just for the collaboration within the United Nations, it has a great potential. This could be quite general, relating to internal issues, relating to interagency, operational and administrative collaboration. But a particular aspect of this is actually data sharing, improved data sharing when it comes to joint projects. You may have heard of building blocks, the blockchain-based project initiated by World Food Program, but it already runs by involving multiple agencies that all work with the same target group of beneficiaries. And until now, sharing data safely while preserving the mandate of each organization was not easy. It wasn't simple and it wasn't fast. And with applications based on blockchain, there is a great promise that this can be improved. My next highlight is facilitation of multi-stakeholder partnership. It actually, it's an extension of the previous point. If you can have a distributed system in which multiple agencies are working together, a number of projects naturally can be open to other stakeholders. So you could have implementing partners, you can have NGOs, you can have different stakeholders, including commercial organizations, that use a shared platform. And if it's well designed and well implemented, it provides a number of possible improvements while preserving data integrity, privacy, etc. So, and when working for the JIU report, of course, the reports are based on contributions by participating organizations. So they are based on data and the facts from the field. And some of the projects we've seen illustrate exactly this point. So there is a UNDP pilot project which involves food vendors, commercial vendors, NGOs, and soup kitchens, different stakeholders working together through a shared platform. My next highlight is a potential for empowerment of individuals. Here I primarily mean beneficiaries of various projects. This is not without a challenge, because it depends a lot on the context and the situation for each project, and what are the conditions in which the blockchain is used, and what are the possibilities and capabilities of the beneficiaries to adopt an advanced digital technology and fully use it. The projects like the one I mentioned with the collaboration between NGOs and soup kitchens and commercial vendors, the main participants have all had the capacity, they all have capacity to participate meaningfully in such multi-stakeholder project. But in some case, with end users, with beneficiaries in the field, this can be a challenge, and we'll return to this when we discuss challenges. So in ideal case, there is a potential for stronger data ownership, whether it's a small farm producer, maybe with some mediation. So that's something that was not foreseen in the original concept of blockchain. If you remember how Bitcoin started, it started with the idea that the end user is empowered without intermediaries. But in some cases, this is completely appropriate and it can work, that there are, for example, community centers or other supporting intermediaries through which the end beneficiaries can participate in such a system. If this is not clear enough, please feel free to ask or point out what's not clear, or ask questions in the chat, which we'll address after this section. And I'm moving on to the next property. Supply chains have been discussed widely, also in the commercial sector. So this is something that when blockchain technologies emerged, many startups and bigger players have looked at this and say, wow, there are so many inefficiencies in global supply chains, local and global supply chains. For example, in the commercial sector, there is a huge amount of funds locked in supply chains. If you look at typical illustration where you have a farm producer selling his wheat to the next stage where it's turned into a flour, and then it goes into a bakery or a factory, and then it goes into a retail chain. It may take several months for the farmer to get paid for his produce. And these are some of the commercial inefficiencies of today's supply chains. Then there are questions of origin and adhering to certain norms and standards. If you're looking at ethically produced items going through supply chains, the immutability and transparency of the blockchain allows for great improvements in this, or at least we see this as a huge potential. Again, one of the UNDP pilot projects explores exactly this with the producers of chocolate. You may have seen this mentioned somewhere. If not, we can come back to the details of this project. In the development sector, I think there is more. So it's not just the commercial inefficiencies that can be improved. There are all the various other elements that can be traced and that can be aligned with ethical values of the projects that want to use improved traceability and transparency of supply chains and their efficiency. So there is definitely potential there. Not without challenges, but again, that's a promise, that's an opportunity. Lastly, more on the technical side, but still very relevant to the UN system, is improving speed of electronic transactions. That doesn't mean that we're only talking about payments, although remittances of different kinds can be covered by, supported by blockchain-based applications, but there are other electronic transactions from various deeds and administrative documents that can be covered by blockchain. So we're not here to compare the speed of commercial credit card processing systems with the speed of blockchain transactions, which maybe 2 years ago was something that people were trying to compare because that was the context in which commercial vendors were looking at it. But there is clearly a space for reducing bureaucracy and improving efficiency of electronic systems through shared platforms with the properties that blockchain has. And lastly, there is potential for blockchain applications, if all the other conditions are met and they are used in proper context, to facilitate digital transformation. So they can be a catalyst to replacing outdated, slow, bureaucratic existing information systems with something more efficient and more up to date. And it's time to maybe look at your questions. Johanna, do we have any questions at this stage?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. I think one specifically related to the section on opportunities that we were discussing. Another one more general on upskilling on blockchain. Let me maybe briefly respond to Hitesh there on his question on upskilling for blockchain tech. For that, we'd actually like to point you to the Atrium platform. That's the interagency platform that was developed by the UN for the UN and has a lot of very useful learning resources on blockchain technology. It's on atrium.network. I'll post it in the chat as well. So you'll find a lot more content there. And the second question, Dejan, I'd like to give to you. It's from our colleague JT, and they're wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on how blockchain could help the UN share data better amongst themselves. I think the colleague perceives that to be an opportunity. Can you go a little bit deeper into that, please?
Let me try without getting entangled in the technical details, but just as an illustration, so if you have different agencies working in a conflict area or a refugee camp, and you may have intervention by World Food Program and an agency for refugees, and you may have UNICEF working in the same area and trying to assist the same people. Without a shared system, they would all have their own individual databases, and each beneficiary would have their own identification and history and data, and connecting these systems, disparate technical systems, is not easy, while trying to preserve the privacy. Of course, these are sensitive data. And a shared platform that allows for pseudo-anonymity could help coordination between these agencies and a better delivery of the aid that is needed and the support that is needed in such situation. So each agency can still have their internal information systems that provide them with detailed information, but they could also have a shared platform. They could have a shared ID identifying different individuals that does not reveal their full identity, but it ensures that it's the same person who might be getting different forms of support through this shared system. So the shared blockchain-based platform can then be connected with individual systems and can be synced with them, allowing a smooth exchange of information. So without going into too much technical, but that's the principle, that's the idea. So to have safe digital ID for beneficiaries that is shared between agencies and then links to their individual detailed databases. Does that answer your question?
I hope it does. Thank you for diving deeper into that. Another colleague has posted here a comment, a question around the use of blockchain for record keeping and whether that could be an opportunity area. He's mentioning, or they are mentioning, land registration, education records. I wonder if that colleague has seen the recent project that was launched by OACT and UN Habitat for doing land registry in Afghanistan. So maybe that sparks this. Dejan, what do you think? Is that an area that you see presents a lot of opportunities for the UN? Record keeping specifically?
I think it does. I think it does. I wouldn't, I would be just, and this is a good introduction to the next block, which will be about challenges. So it's not without challenges, but definitely there is potential there that needs to be explored. There are great properties. Land registries, for example, look like very natural place where you could apply a distributed system. You could have different entities contributing to this. Just a few words of caution. One is whenever you have an interface between the physical world and the digital world, for example, between a blockchain-based registry, the crucial point is data entry into the system. So you have to have really good mechanisms for ensuring that correct information enters the blockchain. Once it's in the blockchain, then it becomes transparent, it's immutable. We benefit from all the properties of blockchain technology, but that interface point is important. Blockchain is ideal for capturing digital entities, so something that's already exists as a digital entity. And when you're interfacing with physical objects, be it land or different property, I think we just have to be aware of it. This is not to say we shouldn't do it. This is just to say, okay, this is a sensitive point. A project should be aware of this and should address this from the very start.
Thank you, Dejan. That's a very good segue into the risk section indeed. So let's go into that. There's a couple of other questions. I'm going to park them temporarily and we'll come back to Mohammed and another colleague after your slides on risk.
Okay, good. Thanks, Johanna. And thank you for your questions. This could be a moment where you also type in the chat before hearing my selection of topics for risks and challenges and threats. Where do you see the biggest risk? Do you feel you would venture a guess? It doesn't have to be a scientifically supported guess, but from what you've heard so far.
Indeed, please post it in the chat. You can select send to everyone and not just panelists. And let's see if we have any thoughts there. JT again, the risk is being hacked. I was expecting that one, JT, so thank you for flagging that risk. Okay, we seem to have an audience in thinking mode, Dejan, so let's go on and give them food for thought.
Okay, so we'll park hacking for the moment. It's there. It's a risk. It's risk that concerns all the digital technology that we have today. It concerns blockchain generally, not just in the UN context. So we'll put it. We'll park that as well, and if we have time, we'll come back to it. I don't mind the question because I'm also working at the moment on a cybersecurity exploration in the UN context, but we'll come back to it. So let's see what's on my selection, my highlight list. I put this one, which is not really, it's not very technical, but to start with, I think we've seen cases of inappropriate use due to a general lack of knowledge about blockchain technology. And I think in the development sector, we even have more responsibility towards seriously evaluating technology before we deploy it in the field, and maybe outside where commercial entities can venture different attempts. The problem with blockchain technology, so on one side, is that we have these high expectations, this hype that has been around for a while now. And we also have the fact that it's, despite being there with us for several years, it's relatively new to non-technical people. And because it mixes the concepts such as governance, a distributed system, decentralized, distributed, what does it mean? What are the implications? That it involves encryption and cryptography to ensure the immutability and privacy of the data. It's not as straightforward as something that we know for decades, a database system or a spreadsheet. And if we, in some situations, I think the risk of trying to apply blockchain without sufficient considerations of what are the key properties, what are the implications beyond technology. It's not a replacement for traditional database. It's not, I wouldn't use a blockchain application in a context in which a traditional database application can do the same job, unless I have really strong reasons, additional benefits that using a distributed ledger would bring. So that was my first point. It's maybe a bit vague. You are free to comment on this in the chat, and maybe we can take that for discussion later if you think it's not clear enough. Meanwhile, I'm going to my next slide. Yes, there is dependency on developed digital infrastructure. Sometimes the initial stages and some applications of blockchain may seem deceivingly simple. But in the end, if you want to have something that is production level, that is secure, that is working well, and it's something that is reliable, you need developed digital infrastructure. And also to reach out the beneficiaries and the users, we need very simple digital infrastructure to begin with. You need reliable internet connection in the field, in different contexts where you want this technology to be used. Closer to the providers, to a system, a blockchain network, you need capacity in-house and a good choice of external support to make this work. So that kind of technical relative complexity, there is a certain risk of applying it to as an effect, having an effect of furthering inequalities. It's not a new issue. We know about digital divide discussions for more than a decade. Definitely, it came the discussions around these issues and how they can be mitigated, and how do we make sure that emerging technologies are actually reducing inequalities and not furthering them, still active. And they evolve because the technology is evolving very fast. But it should be something to calculate with from a very start of any project that should be using blockchain. I've grouped a couple of points here under technical sustainability. As I said, sometimes it can look deceivingly simple, the idea of launching a blockchain, and in some cases, downloading an open source, ready-made blockchain and deploying it on one server in an organization, in an evaluation phase, in a pilot, in a small pilot, can look like something simple and low cost, which is true. But there is a difference between running a small pilot and running a production level system that is distributed, that is run by multiple agencies, that is accessed from different parts of the world at different connection speeds, and that because it's running publicly or in some form through the public internet is exposed to certain security risks. So then starting to deal with this and making it a large-scale production system may have some hidden infrastructure costs. The other thing with blockchain technology is that it continues to develop fairly fast. So there are frequent changes and updates. Sometimes they are small scale, they don't make any huge functional changes, they don't make big feature changes, but in other cases they are significant. And if you conceive a project that is based on a public blockchain, which is still a possibility, while most applications in the UN system lean towards private blockchains, something that I think was tackled in the first webinar, the difference between the two. You also have a hybrid solution. You can build a private application for known users and beneficiaries and run it on top of a public blockchain, which you then treat as an infrastructure. But in those cases, you depend on the software that is developed typically in open source community. So you depend on the developments within that community. And if you look at some of the big cases in the past, we can even look at Bitcoin or Ethereum for examples. We know that blockchain networks have split in two, and then again, one more time into one of the branches because of the differences and resulting in different paths for the communities that have decided to go one way or the other way. So the changes can be significant and they can have significant impact on the functionality of the blockchain and what you're trying to support with it. And lastly, something I mentioned that is not specific for UN applications, but it's particularly sensitive for UN applications because in the UN system, we are sensitive to using technologies which are aligned and in a way that is aligned with the UN system values. So high energy consumption that we find in some cases, and Bitcoin is notorious for it, is not compatible with our work on SDGs. You've seen this was most exposed, that Bitcoin's overall electric energy consumption, especially in its high in peaks of its popularity, would surpass energy consumption of a small country. The reason for that for Bitcoin is that it uses the consensus mechanism that is part of each blockchain network, which decides who among the different nodes is the one to create the next block, is competitive in nature, and it's made in such a way that it takes a lot of computing power and then a lot of electricity. Luckily, this is changing now. So a majority of new blockchain solutions offer alternatives or are from the start not based on this consensus mechanisms, and they deploy the others. And even the number 2 public blockchain network, Ethereum, is switching from proof of work, the energy hungry, the energy consuming mechanism, to proof of stake, which will be much more efficient and much less energy hungry. Next aspect of threats, risks, challenges, I would say, turns around the question of data privacy. As you know, for example, in EU's GDPR, but also in some other regulative frameworks, data privacy is considered very highly, and one of the properties of blockchain is that it's immutable. You cannot delete data from it, and that would automatically negate the right to be forgotten, which is granted to EU citizens, for example, but also in many other legislatures that were inspired by this legislation. If you store publicly identifiable personal data in such blockchain, so one workaround that is that you don't have personal identifiable data on a public blockchain. These are the main issues. Data privacy should also be considered also from the aspect of how easy or how difficult it is to trace somebody, even when you're not using personal identifiable data on a public blockchain, but you're using alias or some kind of digital ID that is not immediately visible and associated with a person. One should consider, okay, but how difficult it is to actually make a connection, because we know that this today is not easy. So a lot of so-called or pseudo-anonymous internet functionality we learn can actually be traced if you have enough resources and can be connected with real identities of people who thought they were using anonymous systems, not just on blockchain, but in blockchain as well. And because of the distributed nature, so this last point on this slide links this one and the next one in a way, because if you have a distributed system, often there are questions, okay, who's accountable for it? So if there is some kind of abuse, in this case, I'm referring to abuse of data and the private data, whether you have an option to, is there accountability? Leading us to the, I think, last slide on the threats and risks, and that's about legal insecurities. Several countries have come up with legal frameworks for regulating some aspects of blockchain technology, but primarily when it comes to financial aspects. Not everything is regulated. And these are, I would say, very few countries have done that, so a small number. And there is no international harmonization, there is no broad legal stability around this. It's a new technology, it's evolving, and so it's regulation. Even on the technical level, the standards are not mature yet, they're not fully developed. Standards that would be something that we can use to know that a particular blockchain meets those standards in terms of privacy, safety, reliability, or what might be important in the UN context, interoperability. So if you have different blockchain technologies deployed, can they talk together? That is what I had in mind for threats, risks, and challenges. My highlights, we'll see what do you have a different view. Before we go into that, just quickly, the report, JIU report on blockchain and the UN system should be published in February 21. You're highly encouraged to look at other reports. Maybe you'll find something useful there. They all have executive summaries as well. This is the URL, and maybe you will find something useful. But we are back to, but now we have time to look at your comments and questions regarding the second section.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Dejan. That was a very, very good introduction to some of the opportunities that we might be expecting, as well as some of the threats and risks to be aware of. And I saw some colleagues post theirs in the chat when we asked earlier. Thank you very much for that. I see, for example, Kim from UN in Vienna is saying integration with our current systems is a challenge. You touched on that in your last point, but because there's a follow-up question, I'd like just to dive a little bit deeper into that. And I'm gonna try and give the floor to Shahui Gracia from UNDP. So Shahui, if you can, you should be able to speak now, and you should be able to unmute yourself. If you'd like to ask the question yourself, please go ahead. Otherwise, I'm happy to take it for you.
Thank you so much, Joan. And this is Gracia from UNDP. We actually have some blockchain projects. And for example, our Lebanon office is using blockchain for crowdfunding. And I actually think it's a great tool for the crowdfunding because like have all the credentials and credits. My question is like how to integrate this blockchain technology into what we call the digital projects in the future, because I was thinking, how can we use the already existing databases and to link it into blockchain instead of like just adopting blockchain and then you have to create a new database. And I think that would like create some overlapping inputting work. So my question is actually how to integrate blockchain and link it to the already existing projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gracia, for your question. Very relevant. One of the more recent trends in blockchain development is actually realization that you don't have to put all the data that you're dealing with in the blockchain itself. Blockchain itself is not a super efficient database, and there are these privacy issues. So one way to use it is actually to keep a lot of data, especially sensitive data, what we call off-chain, which means in traditional databases, but to put sufficient information in the blockchain, in the shared space, that can be useful for other purposes. One of the purposes is so-called zero knowledge proof. Blockchain can be used to verify a certain claim without revealing full details. To keep it simple, I'll give you an example. You could build a blockchain in which you can verify whether people are based on their digital ID, if they are older than 18, for whatever purposes, driving or buying certain items in a supermarket, without actually knowing their age. So blockchain can be used to provide verification of claims without revealing too much information. You can easily create a system and somebody comes with some kind of digital ID card or identification in their mobile phone, you scan it, and you can see the claim is this person is over 18 or not. That wouldn't reveal you their actual age, where they're born, what's their citizenship. This is a very simple example. But to get back to your question is, you can integrate. So if you have significant bulk of data in a private database, you can still integrate it with the blockchain to have this externally looking system which can be used to verify certain claims. And these claims don't have to be trivial. They can be claims that relate to health insurance. They can relate to somebody's financial capacity or refugee status. So they don't have to be trivial, and this can be done. So technical solutions exist for this. And it's mainly a question of assessing a particular context and designing appropriate solution. I hope this answers your question.
I'm going to say thank you, Dejan. It links to another challenge that was listed in our thread. It came from Silvio from FAO in Rome. He said capacity building as both an interesting and exciting challenge. Another colleague that seemed to be very much in the agricultural space, a lot of our comments. So Mastino from, I believe also FAO in Ghana agrees with that. Mas, I'm going to try and give you the floor to ask your question yourself. You should be able to unmute. Please go ahead. If you're unable to talk, I'm very happy to take it for you as well. Okay, so because Mastino doesn't seem to be able to speak, I'm going to pose the question to myself, Dejan, and he's saying, in the case where we are targeting farmers or other members of the rural communities as users of blockchain technology, how can we ensure that the technology is well understood by them and easily applicable? So that could be in entering forest data or in registering land titles, maybe also in the supply chain space. So how do we do this capacity building, which was flagged also as a challenge by someone else, for beneficiaries who might not be exposed to very advanced technologies to date?
I think that that's exactly, that's a very good point, because it aligns very much with my concern. So one of my backgrounds is in technology, but I often find myself in explaining that applying technology is rarely it's the main questions are technical. The questions are really broader than that, and they very much relate to various aspects of capacity development. So I think we should always try to understand key features of each emerging technology, but key features both, okay, what does it do, but more in terms of what are the implications, social, economic, etc., so that we can make projects that work, that are sustainable, and that are appropriate for their intended users. I don't have a simple answer to that question, but I would mention, for example, when we looked from JIU, we talked to UNDP Ecuador project, we've learned that they planned this from the beginning, and they have community centers on the ground, if I recall well, and they have planned, it's an important component of their project is to explain and to empower beneficiaries and to facilitate their access to the technology. So it includes all the components. And if you really want to do capacity development, you really want to look at it at different levels, starting from end beneficiary and all the intermediary levels, so that you can have an impact on a bigger scale. So I would say for me, developing a new project, that would be a key element. So on one side, I think we have to, so even if we are not technical people, we don't have technical background, we have to make an effort to understand the key features of technology. So not at the level of bits and bytes, but at a level of what are these outward looking features, what are maybe power relations, what is happening when you apply particular technologies, and then make this capacity development plan from the very start. That yes, blockchain technology is an important component of it, but what else is needed? And there, the existing knowledge and experience on dealing with capacity development is of great role. We don't have to start from scratch. I hope this is at least a guideline, if not a foolproof answer.
Thank you, Dejan. I think it's a very good guideline that applies to so much of the work that we're doing in the innovation space, especially in the technology place. I am no blockchain expert, but maybe just to add that from my experience, a lot of the technology solutions using blockchain don't necessarily look very different from regular technology solutions. So you as a user might not even know that you're interacting with the blockchain, which could further simplify it. That being said, Mastino, I think that is a great question for the blockchain community. And I know there's a forum on the Atrium where these kinds of questions can be posed. So maybe if you post it there, we'll get some further experiences from within the UN system on how they have handled these kinds of issues. But thank you very much for your question, and I hope we at least gave it a push in the right direction. And with that, Dejan, I would like to give the floor to Alberto to ask his question himself. Alberto, can you?
Yes, thank you very much, Johanna. This is Alberto Medina from Miro. I first would like to take the opportunity to congratulate Dejan and the rest of the team for the outstanding work reached so far in the preparation of the GUI report on blockchain applications in the UN system. And then I would like to ask, and it's a question, really, it's actually a risk related to the current concentration of on the production and development of blockchain systems. So for instance, I quote an example brought by the Digital Economy report produced by the UNCTAD last year, where they state that only 2 countries are accountable for around 78% of blockchain related patent applications. So my question to Dejan is based on this on the experience in the production of on the elaboration, sorry, of the report, but also on your engagement with past technological developments. What are the implications of this concentration dynamics? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alberto. The concentration is a serious issue. I think we meet every day at every level. Even if you look at the mainstream providers of internet, web, digital services, you know, you've heard of this expression of the acronym GAFAM, where we, you know, just outside of the development context, we're facing the domination of internet by a handful of really large companies, and this is becoming visible issues even for industrialized countries, where we know now there are countries that are looking, questioning the monopolistic role, I think, that of commercial entities. And some of these commercial entities are huge. So at one side, they are making this technology more accessible to many people. I'm not looking at it just in black and white, so I understand the scale they have allows them to reduce the cost for consumers, but at the same time, there are a lot of negative effects. They are not great in stimulating diversity of innovation and so on. Now, the patents in the blockchain field, so to be more concrete in relation to blockchain, I don't see the role of patents in the blockchain space as crucial. I think that's if you look at it, majority of blockchains today are open source. There are great open source projects, some without commercial backing, some with moderate commercial backing, but working in a very open and transparent manner without proprietary dependence. So you've heard of Hyperledger based projects. Ethereum also has a very strong open source side, and there are many others. So in a way, from the way I see it, in the real world, I don't think safeguarding intellectual property, keeping it proprietary and closed in the blockchain space, at least, is going to have a large negative impact. It may have in other areas. We see now in the space of artificial intelligence development, machine learning, some changes in that space, even from the big initiatives that started in a very open manner, moving towards more restricted space. OpenAI is one of the examples where we now have a question around it. But in terms of blockchain, at least the concentration of these patents doesn't worry me. What worries me is this bigger disbalance of capacity for digital, some loss of, so maybe another wave of digital divide, because, you know, maybe 10 years ago with what we call Web 2.0, we suddenly had a really positive wave of new internet projects coming from the global south, from developing countries. The barrier to entry was lowered, and it gave me a lot of hope. Now we're seeing a somewhat different trend. I think we really have to be careful, and what we can do is to look for initiatives that that try to counteract this. And in our work, in our space, on one side, you have something like Internet Governance Forum, where you can actually have the voices, different voices heard, and we can start initiatives to try to reduce the disbalance. There are also digital, and there are principles for digital development that we have, which is a great initiative. Maybe Johanna can say something about it. So I think it's a good reminder. We have to be careful to look at it, and to through what we do, not to increase that disbalance.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I'm just posting the link to the digital principles here in the chat as well, in case anyone would like to take a look at that. Maybe also just to add that I think a lot of the blockchains that we've seen being used in the UN are currently private blockchains. So there, the dominance by some key players may not be an as important factor as it can be. Dejan, I realize we're out of time. Do you have time for maybe one final question, or do you need to rush on?
It's okay for me. If our participants can stay, and if you can stay another minute, I'm fine.
Okay, great. So I have two questions, one around quantum computing, and then two others that relate to specific blockchain applications. Take your pick. Which one would you rather go into? Specific applications or quantum computing?
I have no preference. Whichever you want to do.
Okay.
Specific
In that case, let's go with majority indeed, because we have Jawad from UNFPA in Benin, and we also have Mohammed Salam joining us, and they are wondering if you are aware of applications for tracing medical supplies, and as well as peacekeeping missions, how blockchain can be used in communications.
In peacekeeping operations, use of blockchain for communication, I must admit I'm not familiar with. I don't remember seeing any examples. Concretely, no. In peacekeeping context, no. I know of some earlier ideas and projects that put messaging, secure messaging in place to distribute the systems, but I'm not aware of the projects in the peacekeeping context. And the other one was sorry, what was the first one?
First was tracing medical supplies till the last user, so supply chain. Yes,
there are actually, I remember seeing pilot projects in that area. So that's been tried or is being tried now. Having, again, so like other supply chains, having a transparent, reliable chain of information is great. There is potential for it. The pilot projects I've heard of were looking at tracing genuine versus fake medication. I think we may see something related to vaccine transport now. What's, again, is going to be sensitive in that is the relation between the digital certificate, which is on the blockchain, and the external, the physical object. So in case of, for example, vaccine transportation, how do you make sure that all the conditions, the temperature, etc., have been preserved and truly passed onto the blockchain? So that needs to be taken into account and solved.
Very good, thank you for that. And if there are any initiatives in that space, please feel free to share them with us, and we'll be happy to pass them on to Mohammed and Jawad. Will they also be listed? Does the JRU report also include a list of projects that you looked at or that you're aware of?
It does.
It does, wonderful. So that would be another exciting resource to look out for. And you said it's coming in February. We'll be very happy to share this with this group and make it available there. And with that, Dejan, it is my great pleasure to say thank you to you for joining us, for spending your time introducing us to opportunities and risks that we can expect from using more blockchain in the UN. I've learned a lot, as always, in these webinars, slowly getting better with blockchain. I hope everyone in this call is as well, so that we can address these capacity shortages that were mentioned earlier on in the chat. So thank you for helping us with that. It's really, really been a fantastic session, and we appreciate you joining us at such short notice.
Thank you, Johanna. It's a pleasure, and this is exactly, I love the opportunity to sort of bring these technical issues closer to non-technical people and to sort of map technology, governance, capacity development. This is something I really, I'm passionate about it. So if this was a contribution in that direction, I'm happy. And thanks to all participants for their attention and for really good questions. I enjoy those questions. Thank you.
Indeed, very good questions. Thanks for that. And wishing everyone a good day, a good end of the year. Happy holidays if you are celebrating. And we'll come back to you in the next year with the next session of this course, which will look more into existing applications of blockchain in the UN context. So until then, thank you very much. Stay well, stay healthy, and we'll see you very soon. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, everyone.